Thomas waited nervously at the counter of McDonald's, watching the door. It was another busy lunch hour in London. 8 months had passed since he lost his job at Britain's top tech company. Once, he had led a team of 200 people. Now, he wore a red and yellow uniform and asked if people wanted extra sauce. The bell on the door rang. Thomas looked up, and his heart stopped. Walking through the door was Robert Williams, the famous CEO who had been Thomas's boss before everything fell apart. Thomas wanted to hide, but there was nowhere to go. His hands shook as he tried to look busy with the cups and napkins. Maybe Robert wouldn't recognize him. After all, Thomas had lost weight, and his once neat appearance had changed. His hair was longer now, and worry lines marked his face. "Next, customer, please," called his manager. Thomas looked up to see Robert standing directly in front of him. Their eyes met. Thomas saw the moment of recognition flash across Robert's face. Surprise, then confusion, then something like pity. "Thomas? Thomas Baker? Is that really you?" Thomas forced a smile. "Hello, Mr. Williams. Welcome to McDonald's. What can I get for you today?" Robert seemed unable to process what he was seeing. This man had once presented brilliant ideas in boardrooms. He had led the company's most successful mobile project. Now he was taking fast food orders. "Just a coffee, please," Robert said quietly, still staring. As Thomas turned to pour the coffee, he felt the weight of his fall. 3 years ago, he had everything. A beautiful home in Oxford, respect from his peers, and plans for the future. Then came the company cuts. New leadership. Younger workers willing to work for less pay. At 43, Thomas found himself suddenly too expensive and not in touch with current trends. The rejection letters piled up. Savings disappeared. His wife Mary had tried to be supportive, but the stress took its toll on their marriage too. Now he lived in a tiny flat and worked double shifts just to make rent. "Here's your coffee, sir," Thomas said, sliding it across the counter. Robert paid, then hesitated. "Thomas, what happened? You were one of our best." The line behind Robert grew longer. Thomas's manager glanced over with impatience. "Life happened, sir. I need to help the next customer." Robert nodded slowly, then reached into his pocket. He placed a business card next to the coffee cup. "Call me tonight, please." Thomas slipped the card into his pocket as Robert walked away. For the rest of his shift, that small rectangle of paper felt like it was burning through his uniform. Was it pity? A job offer? Or just curiosity about how someone could fall so far? That evening in his small flat, Thomas stared at the card for a long time. The Thomas from 3 years ago would have called immediately. That Thomas was confident and sure of his worth. This Thomas had been rejected too many times. His fingers traced over the fancy raised letters on the card. Robert Williams, Chief Executive Officer, Horizon Technologies. Near his bed sat a worn notebook. Despite everything, Thomas had never stopped thinking, never stopped creating. The pages were filled with ideas for a new system that could help people with disabilities use computers and phones more easily. Sometimes working on these designs was the only thing that made him feel like himself. With a deep breath, Thomas picked up his phone. What did he have to lose? His pride was already gone. "Mr. Williams, it's Thomas Baker." "Thomas, I'm glad you called. Can we meet tomorrow?" "I'd like to talk." "About what, sir?" There was a pause on the line. "About second chances, Thomas. Everyone deserves one." After he hung up, Thomas sat on the edge of his bed, emotions washing over him. Fear, hope, doubt. For the first time in months, he felt something break loose inside him, the tight knot of shame that had been choking him since he first put on the McDonald's uniform. Whatever happened tomorrow, someone had seen him, really seen him, when he had felt invisible for so long. Sometimes that's where healing begins, with being truly seen. As Thomas finally drifted to sleep, the business card sat on his nightstand. Tomorrow might change nothing, or it might change everything. Thomas arrived at the small cafe 20 minutes early. He had ironed his only decent shirt and borrowed a tie from his neighbor. Still, he felt out of place among the well-dressed business people typing on laptops and talking importantly into phones. The cafe was just 2 streets away from the gleaming glass building where he had once worked. Sometimes Thomas walked past it during his breaks, looking up at the windows and wondering what might have been. Now here he was, about to meet the CEO who had replaced him and so many others. "Just water, please," Thomas told the waitress who approached. He couldn't afford to spend money on fancy coffee. At exactly noon, Robert Williams walked in. He spotted Thomas immediately and came over with a warm smile. "Thomas, thank you for meeting me." Robert shook his hand firmly. Thomas nodded, unable to find the right words. "What do you say to the man whose company had thrown you away?" After they ordered, Robert insisted on paying. They sat in awkward silence. Finally, Robert spoke. "I've been asking around about you since yesterday. Everyone remembers you as brilliant, creative, a problem solver. What happened after the cuts?" Thomas stared into his water glass. "I applied for 68 jobs in the first month, got 5 interviews. No offers." "Why not?" "With your experience, too old, too expensive, too something." Thomas shrugged. "After a while, the gaps in my work history got bigger. The questions got harder to answer. Eventually, McDonald's was the only place that would take me." Robert looked troubled. "And your accessibility project? The one for helping disabled users?" Thomas's head snapped up in surprise. "How do you know about that?" "Jenny Mills is now our accessibility director. She mentioned your work was years ahead of what we're doing now." Something stirred in Thomas's chest. Pride, perhaps. Or the ghost of it. "I still work on it sometimes. In my notebook. Just ideas." "Really?" Robert leaned forward, eyes bright with interest. "Do you have the notebook with you?" Thomas hesitated, then reached into his worn backpack. The notebook was filled with sketches, diagrams, and notes, his midnight thoughts when sleep wouldn't come. He handed it over, feeling strangely vulnerable. As Robert slowly turned the pages, his expression changed from curiosity to deep interest, to something like wonder. "This interface design, it's brilliant. The way you've simplified complex commands into natural gestures. It's for people who can't use standard controls," Thomas explained, warming to his subject despite himself. "Too many systems are designed for people with full mobility. I wanted to create something anyone could use regardless of physical limitations." Robert looked up from the notebook. "Why do you think you created this after losing your job? Not before?" The question caught Thomas off guard. He thought for a moment. "When I was at the top, I didn't understand struggle. Now I know what it feels like to be invisible, to have people look past you, to feel like the world wasn't built for you." He paused. "I guess sometimes you need to fall to see things clearly." Robert nodded slowly. "Thomas, I want to make you an offer." Thomas's heart beat faster. Was this it? A way back? "We're starting a new division focused on accessible technology. Small team, tight budget, but real potential. I want you to lead it." Thomas couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Lead it? But I've been serving burgers for 8 months. I'm out of touch with what? Office politics? Corporate jargon?" Robert tapped the notebook. "This is what matters. This thinking. This understanding of human needs. The rest is just noise." Thomas felt tears threatening. He blinked them back. "What if I fail?" Robert smiled, gently. "Then you'll know more than you did before. That's how progress works." As they discussed details, salary, team size, timelines, Thomas felt something unfamiliar expanding in his chest. Hope, not just for a job, but for purpose, for a chance to create something meaningful from his darkest time. Walking home. Later, Thomas passed the McDonald's where he worked. His manager was visible through the window training a new employee. Tomorrow, Thomas would hand in his notice. The thought made him both terrified and excited. His phone buzzed with a text from Robert. "Meeting set for Monday, 9 a.m. Bring your notebook and your best ideas. Second chances don't come often. Let's make this one count." Thomas looked up at the evening sky, where the first stars were appearing. Sometimes life's hardest falls led to the most important journeys. He just needed to be brave enough to take the first step. Thomas walked into the Horizon Technologies building for the first time in nearly a year. The security guard at the front desk didn't recognize him and asked for ID. Thomas showed his new company badge with Project Director printed under his name. The words still didn't feel real. "First day?" the guard asked kindly. "Sort of. More like first day of a second chance." The lift took him to the 5th floor. Robert had given Thomas a small team and a 6-month timeline to develop a working model of his accessibility interface. It wasn't the large corner office Thomas once had, but the small meeting room converted into a workspace felt like a palace after months behind a fast food counter. Thomas was arranging his few belongings when the door opened. A young woman with bright red hair and glasses entered, followed by 2 men. "Hello, I'm Emma," she said cheerfully. "This is James and Oliver. We're your team." Thomas shook their hands, noting their youth. None looked older than 30. "Nice to meet you all. I'm Thomas Baker." "The McDonald's guy," said Oliver with a grin. "Word travels fast around here." Thomas felt his face grow warm. So that's how he would be known now. Emma jumped in quickly. "What Oliver means is that everyone's talking about your amazing comeback. It's brilliant, actually. Robert's going against all the usual rules to bring in someone with real-life experience." Thomas wasn't sure if that made him feel better or worse. "Well, let's see if his gamble pays off. Shall we get started?" Over coffee, Thomas shared his vision for what he called the bridge interface. Technology that would bridge the gap between people with physical limitations and the digital world. Using his notebook sketches, he explained how simple eye, movements, voice commands, and even breath control could replace complex keyboard and mouse actions. The problem with current systems, Thomas explained, is they're designed as special add-ons, separate from regular interfaces. "I want to create something seamless where the same system works for everyone but adapts to each person's abilities." James looked skeptical. "Sounds ambitious for a 6-month project?" "It is," Thomas admitted. "But we're not starting from zero. I've been designing this for months. What we need now is to make it real." For the next few hours, they divided tasks and set up a project plan. Thomas was rusty with some of the newer development tools, but his team was patient. By lunchtime, they had a solid roadmap. As they headed to the cafeteria, Thomas noticed people staring and whispering. He tried to ignore it, but it was hard not to feel like a circus exhibit. The McDonald's guy, the fallen executive, the charity case. At their table, Emma noticed his discomfort. "Don't mind them. In 2 weeks, they'll be gossiping about something else." Oliver nodded. "Besides, half of them are worried they could be in your position someday. Tech isn't kind to people over 40. "Thanks for the reminder," Thomas said dryly. "What Oliver means," James added, "is that you're showing there's a way back. That matters." After lunch, Robert stopped by to check on their progress. "How's it going?" Thomas was honest. "The team is brilliant. The stairs in the hallway are less so." Robert nodded. "I expected that. That's why I want you to present at next week's all-hands meeting. Tell your story, show them why your perspective matters." Thomas felt panic rise in his chest. "Present? To the whole company? About what happened to me?" "Yes. Not as a victim or a charity case. As someone with unique insight. Someone who can see what others can't." That night, Thomas sat in his small flat trying to write his presentation. How could he stand in front of hundreds of people, many who had kept their jobs when he lost his, and talk about serving burgers while they built their careers? His phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "We believe in this project. We believe in you. Don't let the whispers win." Thomas stared at the message for a long time. Then he opened his notebook to a fresh page and wrote at the top, "What falling down taught me about building up." As he wrote deep into the night, Thomas realized something important. His story wasn't just about loss and redemption. It was about how sometimes we need to be broken open to let new light in. How failure can be the best teacher if we're brave enough to learn from it. By morning, he had a presentation that wasn't about shame or pride. It was about seeing the world differently when you've been forced out of your comfortable place in it. And maybe, just maybe, that new vision was exactly what they needed to build something extraordinary. Thomas stood backstage at the company meeting, straightening his new tie. 300 employees waited in the main hall. His hands were shaking. "You'll be brilliant," Emma whispered, giving his arm a quick squeeze. "Just tell your truth." Robert introduced him briefly. "Today we have someone with a unique perspective on innovation. Please welcome Thomas Baker, director of our new accessibility project." As Thomas walked to the stage, the room fell quiet. He could feel their eyes. Some curious, some skeptical, some kind. He took a deep breath and began. "Year ago I was serving you Big Macs and fries," he said simply. A ripple of uncomfortable laughter moved through the crowd. "Before that I sat where you sit. I had a corner office and a team of my own. Then came the cuts and suddenly I was obsolete. Too expensive. Too old." Thomas clicked to his first slide, a photo of himself in the McDonald's uniform. "This isn't a sad story. This is a story about seeing differently. When you stand all day taking orders from people who don't look you in the eye, you learn something about being invisible. When you struggle to pay rent after a lifetime of comfort, you understand vulnerability in new ways." He clicked through slides showing his notebook sketches, developed over lonely nights at his kitchen table. "Our new project isn't just about accessibility. It's about understanding that all of us, at some point, will face limitations. Age, illness, accidents, life changes us. Technology should change with us." The room was completely silent now, all eyes focused on him. "We're building something called Bridge Interface. It adapts to you, whether you have full mobility or significant limitations. It learns how you move, how you speak, even how you breathe, and creates pathways that work for your unique abilities." For the next 15 minutes, Thomas showed early prototypes and explained the vision behind them. When he finished, the applause was genuine and warm. Over the weeks that followed, Thomas's team worked tirelessly. The project gained momentum. Other departments offered help. Robert secured additional funding, and slowly Thomas felt himself becoming more than the McDonald's guy. He was just Thomas again, respected, valued. Then came the setback. 3 months into development, while demonstrating an early version of the system, everything crashed. Not just small glitches, complete failure. The eye-tracking software conflicted with the voice recognition. The gesture controls created false inputs. Nothing worked together. "We have to start over," James said after hours of failed attempts to fix it. "The framework is flawed." "We don't have time to start over," Thomas replied, rubbing his tired eyes. "The budget review is in 2 weeks. "Maybe Robert will understand," Emma suggested. Thomas shook his head. "This project was already a risk. If we fail now..." He didn't need to finish the sentence. They all knew what failure would mean, not just for the project, but for Thomas's second chance. That night, Thomas stayed late in the office, staring at lines of code until they blurred. Around midnight, Emma returned with coffee and sandwiches. "You should go home," Thomas told her. "So should you," she replied, sitting beside him. "But here we are." They worked in silence for a while. Then Emma asked quietly, "What was the hardest part? When you lost everything?" Thomas thought for a moment. "The shame. Feeling like I'd failed. Like I wasn't enough. And now? Are you afraid of that happening again?" Thomas looked at her. This bright young woman who had never known real failure, who still believed that talent and hard work always won. "Yes," he admitted. "I'm terrified." Emma nodded slowly. "You know what I think? I think that's your superpower." "Fear?" "No. Understanding what's at stake. The rest of us can go back to other projects if this fails. You're fighting for something bigger." They stayed until dawn, picking apart the code, rethinking the basic architecture. By morning, they had identified the fundamental problem. They were trying to layer accessibility onto existing interfaces rather than building a truly universal system from the ground up. "We need to start fresh," Thomas announced when Oliver and James arrived. "Not from the technology side, but from the human side. Let's bring in actual users with different abilities and build with them, not for them." "That wasn't in the plan," James pointed out. Neither was failure, Thomas replied with new determination. Sometimes you have to break the whole thing down to build something better. Robert was skeptical when Thomas explained the delay, but agreed to extend the deadline by 1 month. Just don't make me regret this, he warned. As Thomas led his team in this new direction, he realized something important. His greatest qualification wasn't his technical knowledge or past experience. It was his intimacy with reinvention, with starting over when everything falls apart. Sometimes, breaking was the first step to breakthrough. 3 months later, Thomas waited nervously behind the stage curtain. Today was the official presentation of Bridge Interface to the company board, investors, and industry press. Everything depended on the next 30 minutes. Ready? Robert asked, appearing beside him. Thomas nodded, though his stomach was in knots. As ready as we'll ever be. What no one in the audience knew was how close they had come to complete failure. After starting over, Thomas's team had worked around the clock for weeks. They'd brought in 12 people with different physical abilities to test and help design the system. The breakthrough had come from Peter, a 30-year-old with advanced muscular dystrophy who could only move his eyes and 2 fingers. Stop thinking about what I can't do, Peter had told them one frustrating afternoon. Build something that responds to what I can do, then expand from there. That simple shift in thinking had changed everything. Now it was time to show the world what they'd created. Robert stepped onto the stage to introduce the presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, a year ago, Thomas Baker was working at McDonald's. After being let go from his tech position, today he's going to show you the future of accessible technology. Thomas walked out to polite applause. He looked different now, confident, well-dressed, clear-eyed. But the greatest change was inside, invisible to the audience. Good morning, he began. I'd like to introduce you to someone important. The large screen behind him lit up, showing Peter in his wheelchair at home. Hello, everyone, Peter said, his voice synthesized through the computer system. I'm joining you today using Bridge Interface, which Thomas and his team built with me. Not just for me. The audience watched in amazement as Peter navigated complex digital environments using subtle eye movements and tiny finger gestures. He showed how he could write emails, edit photos, and even code, all with movements so small they were barely visible. Before Bridge, Peter explained, I was limited by what technology thought I could do. Now the technology adapts to what I actually can do. Thomas stepped forward again. Bridge isn't just for people with significant physical limitations, it's for all of us. He demonstrated how the same system worked for people with temporary injuries, older adults with arthritis, and even busy professionals who wanted to multitask. The interface learned from each user, creating personalized pathways through digital spaces. Technology should bend to human needs, Thomas concluded, not the other way around. When the presentation ended, the applause was thunderous. Investors immediately began asking about market timelines. Technology journalists were already typing on their phones. Robert stood grinning at the side of the stage. Later at the celebration party, Thomas found a quiet moment with his team. They raised their glasses in a toast. To starting over, Emma said. To seeing differently, added James. To second chances, Thomas finished. As the evening wound down, Thomas stepped outside for some air. The night was clear and cool. He thought about how much had changed in 1 year, from the lowest point of his life to perhaps his finest professional achievement. His phone buzzed with a text from Peter. Thank you for seeing me as more than my limitations. This technology will change lives. Thomas smiled as he typed back. You changed mine first. Robert joined him on the balcony. We've already had 3 investment offers. Bridge is going to be huge. That's good news. It gets better. The board wants to create a permanent division around this concept, with you as executive director. Thomas took a deep breath. Thank you, but I need to think about it. Robert looked surprised. Think about it? This is everything you worked for. A year ago it would have been, Thomas agreed. But now I'm not sure a fancy title matters as much as the work itself. He explained his new idea, taking Bridge beyond corporate offices and wealthy markets. bringing it to schools, libraries, and community centers, making it available to people who couldn't afford cutting-edge technology. That doesn't sound very profitable, Robert observed. Not immediately, Thomas admitted. But it's the right thing to do. And sometimes doing the right thing leads to unexpected opportunities. As they talked into the night, Thomas realized the greatest gift of his fall hadn't been this professional comeback. It had been the chance to redefine what success really meant to him. Sometimes life's darkest moments can lead to the brightest clarity. Sometimes you need to lose your path completely before finding the one that truly matters. And sometimes the bridge you build for others becomes the very one that carries you home. The next morning, Thomas would begin again. Not rebuilding his old life, but creating a new one, with purpose, meaning, and the hard-won wisdom that comes only from falling down and finding the courage to rise.